to give us a theological reflection, Jesus Asian, yesterday, today, and forever. I present to you Father Francis Gustilo, SDB.
In this age where a call can just take a second to reach home. In this age where
I'm Father Francis Gustilo, a Filipino priest of the Salesian Society of St. John Bosco. I was tasked to make a theological reflection on this title, Jesus Asian, the same yesterday, today, and forever. The context of this particular title is taken from the letter to the Hebrews. And as many know, this letter, probably they say, having a Pauline influence, nevertheless has a very distinguishing feature. It speaks about the priesthood of Jesus. Now you know that Jesus was not possibly a priest of his own time, because the priesthood in the time of Jesus belonged to a tribe called Levi or Levitical. And Jesus was belonging to the tribe of Judah, of the house of David. So therefore, he could not be part of that bloodline. Probably he could still be a king from the blood of the house of David, but not a priest. So therefore, the kind of priesthood that the letter to the Hebrews would like to really present is a Jesus who did not make any offering sacrifices, but rather Jesus himself is the victim of his own sacrifice. They say even that he did not need an altar, but his own body was the altar of sacrifice. Incarnate, becoming flesh, everyone who is truly human will have his own sufferings to bear. And Jesus, in becoming human, the Word made flesh in becoming man, would have those struggles and sufferings. But it's different when you know how to offer them. And Jesus is that kind of priesthood who offered himself. If we would say that Jesus Asian is the same yesterday, what is that yesterday of Jesus? If not that he offered himself to the Father on the cross. The cross is a terrible symbol of ignominy. A criminal is one who deserves the cross. The crucifixion is a Roman way of executing a criminal, but the highest form of crime that a person could do deserves crucifixion. But what does Jesus deserve of that crucifixion? In fact, there is a thief in the Gospel of Luke that says, he does not deserve this. He is not a criminal. So what did Jesus really offer? Himself? I think better is that he did what the Father wanted to do. The Father wanted to offer himself to his children. As a good father, he conceived that the only way for his children to return to his loving embrace is to be one of them and then take their place in the struggle against death. Death being the greatest evil that could ever happen. And this desire of the Father, Jesus accepted. As a son, he told the Father, I will do it for you. The Father might have said, no. What I conceive, I will execute. And the Son said, Dad, I am your son. Let me do according to your will. So that if you look at this non-synoptic gospel, John, as they call the Gospel of John, he never had an agony at the garden because he knew everything. And knowing everything, because of his intimate relation, his intimate connection to the Father, he would take the Father's will as his very own. And for this, in the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, where there is no agony, when the cohorts and even the security guards of the Sanhedrin with Judas was there, it was Jesus who came forward because he would not want his sheep to be hurt. Who are you looking for? I am. And they all fell down. But then, when he said a second time, but who are you looking for? Jesus the Nazarene, I told you I am. If you are wanting to pick me up, leave these people aside. You know, the evangelist would say, he told this because he promised them that not one of those given to me by my Father will perish. Jesus offers himself in the stead of the Father who wanted to offer himself for us. Jesus is the epitome of following the desires of God, making his own that desire. And so therefore, if you would look from that angle of yesterday, what made crucifixion truly a day, Good Friday, a day that speaks of the goodness of the Lord, it speaks of the goodness and the unmerited love of the Father for us, his children. But you see, Jesus is not just the Son of God. He is the Word, of course, but became flesh. In being a person who would want to take the desire of the Father to be his own, then Jesus also is projecting to us what it means to be children of the Father, to be adopted children of the Father, who were inserted into the body, which is the church, to be part of that sacrifice, the bodily sacrifice that Jesus did on the cross yesterday, today must become the insertion of every Christian in that body, into that mystical body of Jesus. We are supposed to be the priesthood, taking the priesthood of Jesus Christ, our brother. We don't offer sacrifices like the Jews or a Levitical priest. We offer ourselves. If we are participating in the Eucharist, we become Eucharist. As we exit the church, we become not just a container of that Eucharist, but we join Jesus in his sacrifice, in his offering of ourselves. So today, we are being challenged in an Asian context to be offering ourselves to our brothers and sisters, and above all, to God. First and foremost, in fact, to God. So if today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. It's so difficult to die for one's brother or friend. But Jesus died for his enemies at that time. In the context of Asia, today, we have what we would call a Red Wednesday. What are we commemorating on a Red Wednesday? That the persecuted Christians of the world, and most of whom reside in Asia. You can just imagine Asian countries so close to the Philippines that are encountering the shedding of blood, of separation from relatives because of their faith and because of their desire to offer themselves for their own families. If you speak about wars, if you speak about cheap labor, if you speak about refugees, if you speak about hunger, if you speak about so many different forms of poverty like marginalization, people in the fringes, that is the Asian continent. We still belong to what they would call the third world. Not just developing countries, but majority of us are the underdeveloped countries. And we take the brunt of developed countries. Their what the Holy Father Pope Francis says, the ideological colonization that makes us be kind of, we have to toe the line of the Western mentality in gender equality, in the question of population control, in the question of many things. We are an Asian persecuted continent, emotionally, politically, and even, we could say, religiously. How many of our people suffer silently that they could not express the religious affiliation to Jesus Christ and the church for that matter? Because they would lose their work. Probably they would be even put in jail. If not, they might be put into persecution, physical persecution. And for this reason, the Jesus of yesterday, who willingly offered himself to God, because that was the desire of the Father to offer himself for us brothers, so many Asians are doing this. I would just like to say an example. In an online course I'm doing over this period of time, there is a lady who is with us, and I said, where is your church? And she lives in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. She says, we have the church of Our Lady of Arabia, of Saudi Arabia. And he says, where is the place? We are the church, Father. There is no edifice. There is no building of our church. Every home can be a place where the sacrifice of the Eucharist can be placed. And we take the risk of being not only incarcerated, but even deported. And even our husband could lose his job. We lose everything if we exercise our faith. And yet, I saw in this woman a fantastic, peaceful, tranquil soul that continues to desire to learn more about the faith. Because though in a land that is persecuting or not allowing Christians to exercise their religious freedom, she is free. She is free because she has lost already that fear, that fear that could grip a human person. And she's just one of many, many more persons who are willing to offer their lives for God, for the faith, and among their brothers and sisters who are Christians. So today, Jesus Christ is really amongst us in Asia. is part and parcel of that suffering, which is not just simply a kind of taken, but even desired, accepted, in order to share the light of faith. But this today is not simply, we could say, in terms of the exercise of the creed, of being able to celebrate in worship the faith. It is also a persecution in terms of our moral principles. How people are kind of denigrated or looked down because of their moral standing, of their desire to be right before God's eyes, in terms of the exercise of their gender as they are. It is also in terms of what we would call they're willing to fight for their dignity, to fight for their, we could call it justice. And therefore, this enters into the today's reality that the cry of the poor is actually the same as the cry of the earth. Or the cry of the earth today is the cry of the poor. And that cry of the earth is also Asian. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, says, we can never theologize, we can never talk of God, simply about God, without any reference to His creation. Why? Because creation is being molested, abused, in fact, destroyed. Why? Because of this greed, of the avarice of wanting to have everything for oneself. And in the process, one takes from the other what is rightfully of the other and puts that other into the margins, into the crumbs, as we would say, and not having the rightful ownership of the resources of one's own land. That is very true in our Asian context. The denuding of the forests are happening in our continent. The pollution of the air, it's happening in our continent. And what is the effect on us? Super typhoons. If you just want to think about this reality of super typhoons, it's because of the density of the atmosphere that creates a tremendous evaporation because of the heat of the climate change. And when this evaporation of the water of the seas comes back down, you can just imagine it is not just rain, it is total disaster of that rainfall. Because in the denuded forest, it becomes landslide. And who are those beneath the denuded forests? Are the people of the margins. And they die in the heap of mud. There is even a typhoon that happened in my country where what came down from the denuded forest is timber, logs and logs. It was not the soil that gave way. It was the timber that destroyed homes and villages. Who earns from this kind of denuding? Definitely not the owners of that land. It is pocketed with the avaricious greed of certain industries. And we are just for the picking. The poor are just for the picking. For this reason, if we would speak about Jesus Asian yesterday, today, and now we could say forever, what would be the mission of a true Christian spirited human person, of a man and a woman who are really wanting to make that principle of their lives the Jesus in his true priesthood? It would entail that a person decides with the gift of that love that comes only from the Spirit that Christ has poured out into our hearts, the Spirit that He gave that we may live. It is the same Spirit that we have received in baptism and the confirmation, that now we would exercise to allow that Spirit to breathe forth life in us, through us, for the others. So while the Father has this great desire of self-offering, yesterday that Jesus made it his own. And now, today, the Christian churches in Asia should live in the midst of suffering and pain. The Holy Spirit urges us on, every Christian, and empowers us to give life to those in the margins of society, to the poor. But somehow the greatest poverty is not just what could be politically better, what could be economically developed, what could be, let's say, whatever form that we could hold, but we could somehow touch, smell, and see. No, the greatest poverty today and the mission of the Asian Jesus, or the Jesus that is Asian, is to reflect that in every human person, though marginalized, persecuted, lies the goodness, the original goodness that God has placed. And therefore, our mission is to rediscover what potential every person can offer, so that in the exercise of true freedom, that person will be willing to also offer himself or herself for the benefit of the others. That requires instruction. That requires not only example, but to be able to give an accountability of one's behavior, of one's worship, by instructing the ignorant. And so, in a way of living in dialogue, as the Federation of Asian Bishops Conferences tell us in the past 50 years, that mission in Asia is to continue to live in dialogue with cultures, traditions, religious traditions, and the poor. And now it says, in the cry of the earth, who are becoming more ecologically sustainable. I feel that if you would want to speak the language of God today in the world, we must be ready how to bring this Christian morality, Christian way of worship. How do we connect it so that our brothers and sisters may understand that there is this God that continues to provide, nourish, and support us? We have to have a mission that is also instructional in a language that especially the young of our age would find attractive because it becomes something one is able to understand. So we need a theologizing, we need a catechizing, we need an evangelizing using the language that is understood by our young people. And what is that language? I think Jesus in Asia. Jesus today, yesterday, is the Jesus that becomes the revelation of the Father, the light that sheds its rays to clarify, to see the inner truth of everything. And in Asia, a young continent where majority are young people, the church should speak the language that every young person knows. It's called the digital language. That you don't need to put subtitles, that you don't need to put so many things in terms of words. But if the graphic design speaks specifically in the attractive things that the young are able to recognize and realize, how could it be that in the Philippines we would be latched to the K-drama, to pop music of the Koreans? They don't speak our language, but they speak the language of the young. They speak the language and the artistry and the art forms that bring young people together. This is the work of the Jesus Asian, to be capable of the language of social media, because it reaches not only to the hearing or seeing, but above all, of the interiorizing, of the questioning, of the reckoning in their consciences of what is true, good, beautiful. Our Asian mission is that in the dialogue of peoples around us, they feel oneness, but they also see the beauty of harmony and peace. So they come to understand the truth that sets everyone free. That is the Jesus yesterday, the way, the truth, the life. And I'm sure if the young people of Asia, of this continent, recognizes and understands this language that the church will speak to them using the social media forms, then it will be the one to enliven them to become truly the vanguards of creation. Above all, they will be the one to bring brotherhood among their peers and neighbors. And why not? They would be the one to truly lead society into service for one another. This I would want to sustain is a form of stating that indeed we have a theological footing into the Jesus Asian.